Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be with you this morning. It's a pleasure to come to Los Alamos via Zoom or satellite or however you want to say it. During this trying times, we're doing things that are unusual, and it's always a pleasure to serve with a colleague such as John Cullinan. And I just think the world of him, and I'm sure you do too. Today, I want to speak with you on the topic of gratitude and loss. Gratitude and loss. Since the coronavirus struck, it feels like we're living in a semi-dystopian world. On top of the ongoing crisis of leadership in this country, there is a collective sense of lost living standards and hope for the future. The Financial Times reported 73% of Americans' incomes have been reduced in some way by the pandemic. It's bad, but gratitude can persist amid this pandemic. Gratitude requires grit, that is, continuous hard work. The news of a New York City hospital medical director dying by suicide a few weeks ago, the millions of displaced workers, the endless lines of cars awaiting food donations, and so much more are hard things to bear. With grit, we can work through such experiences. On top of all of this, my mother died about a month ago. She was 96 and slipped into the next realm peacefully and painlessly. When my sister, who was talking to me on the phone at the time, pronounced her death, I felt peace and gratitude. Having a parent live almost 100 years feels like a gift from a overly generous universe. Mama was a gift to my family and her community. So why not choose to celebrate that gift as joyously as I can? How one responds to loss is largely a result of conditioning. And I try to resist conditioned behavior that pushes in the other direction and choose gratitude. Elie Wiesel once said, "No one is as capable of gratitude as one who has emerged from the kingdom of night." Then Samuel Johnson said, "Gratitude is a fruit of great cultivation. You do not find it among gross people." Gratitude requires continuous practice. Practicing gratitude for small things lends itself to living in gratitude when the big things hit you. Gratitude increases with understanding of the sentiments of the Serenity Prayer pronounced by theologian Reinhold Niebuhr and widely adopted by Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step recovery programs. It reads, "Grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." During the pandemic, there is an abundance of change around us, most of us which we cannot affect. Such powerlessness translates into loss, lost jobs and lost paychecks, freedom and a sense of self-determination, and even relationships, some of which will return, but when and at what cost? This brings me to grief. Emily Dickinson wrote a short poem which says, "I measure every grief I meet with narrow, probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has an easier size." And then there was Shakespeare who said, "Everyone can master a grief, but he that has it." Or I might say, she or they that have it. Uncertainty generates ambiguous loss, a term coined by the therapist Pauline Boss. It is a loss that occurs without clear understanding when a loved one is physically missing, but death is unverified, or when a parent leaves for no reason clear to a child. Unlike verifiable death, there is no validation that loss has occurred, and people are left in a limbo of confusion, searching for answers, complicating and delaying the grieving process, and often resulting in unresolved grief. In the COVID-19 world, everything seems ambiguous, whether it is the lack of medical testing, confusion over stimulus checks, overwhelmed unemployment systems, sheer madness about opening the economy, or the need for face masks. Certainty is missing everywhere you turn. Well, back to my mother, who reared me and prepared me for the world, and then released me to fly like an eagle with wings. While I maintained a steady love and concern for my mother, I relied less on her and reported few day-to-day life events and heard few of hers as time went by. For the last 36 years, I've lived physically and psychologically apart from her. And she wasn't a person who opened up easily, at least to me. But she lives on within me always as a source of love, joy, and inspiration. I always carry with me her love for me and the way that she's loved me. And there is nothing ambiguous about that. When the sports writer Mitch Albom heard that his favorite college professor, whom he hadn't seen in 20 years, was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, he began visiting him weekly. In his best-selling book, Tuesdays with Morrie, Albom described their visits focused on his old professor's wit and insights. One time, Mitch asked Morrie why he bothered following the news since he wouldn't be around to see how things turned out. Morrie responded, "It's hard to explain, Mitch. Now that I'm suffering, I feel closer to people who suffer than I ever did." The other night on TV, I saw people in Bosnia running across the street, getting fired on. I just started to cry. I feel their anguish as if it were my own. I don't know any of these people, but how can I put it? I'm almost drawn to them. The world understands our sufferings, but it's more than empathy. In times like these, it helps to have a Maury-like empathy to get through. It also helps to have trust in the future. It helps to revisit our seventh principle on interconnectivity to remind us that we're all affected when one is affected. I heard this story from a UU colleague that I will close with. He said, after running the New York Marathon, that the first half of the New York Marathon is a party. You are swept along by 28,000 runners and the crowds lining the streets. You are touring the ethnic neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Queens. You feel like you could run forever. At mile 13, you cross over into Manhattan and start heading north, away from the finish line. The crowds are thinner now. The party is over. At about mile 16 or 18, you hit a wall. You're absolutely miserable. Physically and psychologically, you're busted. He says, I remember passing one of those first aid stations where runners are lying on cots, pale and gaunt, with IVs dripping into their arms. And I thought, you lucky dogs. At that point, I began to despair, he said, imagining myself having to go home and tell everybody I didn't finish. Why did I ever sign up for this race? What made me think I could do this? That's when it hit me. One way or another, I had to get to Central Park. I had no car, no money. I would have to get there on my own 2 feet. So I might as well keep on running. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Don't think about the next 6 miles, just think about the next step. Gradually, the miles will pass, and when you cross that finish line, it feels like glory, even when you are in 10,044th place. Well, some of you may be hitting a wall right now, feeling like this pandemic situation is the worst. You may be feeling down or sad or uncertain. That grief is okay. Just remember, there's a lot to be grateful for. Gratitude and loss can coexist. Remember to practice continually and be gritty about it. Once prepared, no virus nor pandemic can take that away from you. Amen, Ashe, and let it be so.